Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi, this episode is about modern leaders working everywhere, managing their teams from anywhere. We see so many managers under pressure. We recognize leading distributed teams is harder. What is the right approach? What are the critical rules of engagement? What support do employees need? Anomalies aside, new work dynamics and models are broadly accepted. However, this is not an okay, on to the next issue, AI situation. In parallel to addressing AI, your company must also be up-leveling for other elements of modern work, and leaders learning how workplace flexibility is best integrated so they can manage evolving business and workforce dynamics successfully. What can we learn from seasoned leaders who have already spent years not co-located with their teams, managing their division or company remotely, who've long been trialing and erroring distributed work arrangements? What management principles do they spotlight? At the same time, we need to consider that long-term dynamic distributed work requires supporting employees working everywhere holistically, ensuring their well-being and seamless access to resources, tools, and IT support, and that they can work safely and securely. I'm delighted to be talking with Melissa Puls, Chief Marketing Officer and SVP of Customer Success at Ivanti, which provides software solutions that elevate and secure everywhere work. Melissa has much experience as a leader building and managing highly effective decentralized teams. Hi, Melissa. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I am very well. So you started off studying communications and psychology. Why?
Well, listen, at the time, I had no idea that those two things were related to one another. But I ended up working in marketing, and that starts from way back in the Wayback Machine. My mother was what was considered now a CMO, but at the time was a head of marketing for a tech company. So, long story there, but I really got very interested in marketing at a young age and went off and got a degree in communications and psychology, not knowing those two were connected, but marketing is very much about understanding the psychology of the way people are thinking about what we offer them. And if you can understand the perspective and the point of view of your buyer, you can deliver a message and a solution that fits their needs.
That's interesting that your mother at the time was a CMO of a tech company. And you did actually tell me when we spoke before that your father at the time was also mayor of the town that you were living in. Mm-hmm. I love this power couple that you were growing up with. That's a really interesting dynamic, what you're learning. And obviously then growing with that idea of marketing and communications, which obviously both of them are very talented at.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, this was in a time when women it wasn't necessarily common that women had jobs that were in the boardroom, right?
Right.
I used to say, hey, why can't, my mom throw on jeans before she'd pick me up? She'd show up in her power suit, or, hey, always the last one to be picked up from, gymnastics or whatever right. I was doing. But what I learned was women can do anything, not anything men can do, but just anything, right? So that was a lesson that I learned very early on. And my father owned his own business, but he also became the mayor of the city, a little city called Marlborough, for any of you folks out there that are from Massachusetts. It's a little town, country kind of city, we call it, outside about 20 miles west of Boston. Nice. And he became the mayor because he wanted to do good things for our city. What I learned, there was a bunch of things I learned through that, but what I found was my dad, there was a lot of reverse roles there that my dad at the time did a lot of the things. Really, they were partnering in it all. Right.
Yeah.
And the women and men and gender roles to me were neutralized because my dad was, doing the laundry and the cooking and all that stuff equally as what my mother was. And it was really about, and this led to some of the key things that became core principles in me, which was having a flexibility to have a work environment. I remember my dad had a lot of flexibility because he was home and he was, working as a mayor, but he was always around town. And my mother had a commute. She was, as I said, she was head of marketing for Kronos, which is now UKG, but just amazing company. And she was doing the commute all the time and driving back and forth from the city. And I always was thinking like, man, there's so much time. She's racing to pick me up, as I mentioned, late from whatever. And my dad was like, but like, if we could have more flexibility in the workplace, we could spend more time within our family unit and supporting each other and not necessarily having these specific times and places we need to be all the time. And that, I made later choices professionally. That flexibility became a core principle in my mind because I was always thinking about, why are we spending so much time doing things that aren't necessarily the most productive things versus spending time as a family? But I will say that, I always felt like my sister and I were the number one important thing, even in an environment where there was a lot going on with people really stretching themselves to be the best they can be, my dad in the community and my mom in the workplace.
I had to take my hat off to both of your parents to enable both you and your sister to feel that way, because it isn't easy when there is so much going on and there's such a strong pull from corporate, particularly when your mother is in a situation which isn't standard by any means at that time.
At that time, yeah, absolutely.
I love this background and the learnings that you clearly had as you were going through that and how it's informed all that you've been doing later. After leaving college, you then went to Kronos, which must have been an interesting dynamic because your mom is high up in the company. How was that? Because it's like being at school where your mom is the teacher or something like that. Hang on a second. You're kind of used to it because your father is mayor anyway, or not. Was it different in a business environment?
Well, look, my mother was exiting. She was retiring at the time when I started coming into the workforce. So she certainly... there's no doubt there was a window opened there for me to jump through with an opportunity to get my understanding of the foundations of marketing, which was amazing. And, now whether it's, I have 5 children, so whether it's, my children or other people that are coming up from university and college, I always try to open up those windows too for people that really want it and have a desire to do so. So, that was something I really found important and I benefited from in myself. And I try to give that back to the community myself. But I will say that, the first job I had in marketing was sitting in a closet, as a fulfillment coordinator. And my job
that sounds really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. Well, they were spending about $1 million outsourcing fulfillment at that time, your actual packages that you put together to deliver. They hired me for a lot less than that coming out of college. And I set up a fulfillment center in the corporate headquarters, and I would sit outside the inside sales team, and I would listen to the conversations that they were having. And I thought it was the most important job on the planet because I was putting together the package that was going to be delivered to our potential buyers. And at the end of the day, I had my mail cart and I would bring it down to the mailroom, and I was like success with all those yellow packages at the end of the day. So, listen, I think what the wonderful thing about having my mother pave the way is the way in which she operated with teams. She really put the human element first in building teams and making sure that she had a diverse group of people that she was working with and really embraced the different perspectives and point of views on her team. And when I stepped in there, people respected my mother so much that I got a certain level of respect that came with that. I didn't earn it at that time, but they thought maybe this kid, some of what she did wore off on her.
They might have given you a bit of wiggle room to begin with. Yeah.
Maybe a little little bit of wiggle room, but I earned it from all those packages that I stuffed every day, and I think that was one of the first lessons I learned in the corporate world is that I realized after doing that job that I could I could do it in about 20 hours a week.
Okay.
Once I set up the fulfillment center and knew what I had to, I could do it about 20 hours a week. And I had a moment in my brain that I was like, I have a choice here. And this is a lesson I think I learned I know I learned from my dad, was I can rest on my laurels and, stretch this puppy out for 40 hours or I could look up and out and figure out what other problems I could solve for the people around me. And I saw these really stressed out marketing managers who had, so many things that they needed to do. And I felt like I could support and help them. So I went to my boss, who was Gary McNeil. Gary, and maybe you're out there still, Gary. And I said, Gary, listen, if you make me a marketing coordinator, I will help all of these, stressed out marketing managers, and you're going to look good because you're going to give them some support. And I will hire an intern to do my job, and I'll oversee that person. So, and, maybe just give me a little bit of a bump and something, and I'll, go on my way. And he said yes. And why wouldn't he? Right. So I hired an intern to do that job. And then that was my first promotion, if you will. And I was able to learn a lot more by engaging with these marketing managers who would give me all the stuff that they just didn't have time to do.
Melissa, now I understand how you have 5 kids, because you're a process person. You know how to manage stuff. You know how to make things happen. So no surprise.
Maybe. I've also fallen on my face a bunch of times too. So it's not.
That's how we learn.
That's how we learn. Absolutely.
I imagine you then helped organize and redesign the work that these marketing folks were doing. What were you learning? And then you took a step out, which was another very proactive step.
Yeah, it was. And I will say, Kronos, I was there for about 5 years doing a variety of things and really got my foundation built, not only in how you do the work, but in what you do, but also the how you do it and how you treat people and support one another and build great teams. So it was a wonderful, wonderful organization. But I made the decision early in my career that I wanted to live in a place where I really, really enjoyed. And not that there's anything wrong with Boston and living in a suburb of Boston, but I wanted to live by the ocean. And I had spent my summers going to Martha's Vineyard as a kid and spending a lot of time on the Cape. And I would say, who's to say you can't live and work where you want to live? And that's when the flexibility started to come into my mind from some fundamental learnings that I had from my childhood. And at that time, Kronos, and Kronos is still pretty corporate centric, I'd say. Mm-hmm. But at that time, nobody worked from various locations. So I decided that I wanted to move to Cape Cod. I wanted to raise my family and be by my parents who were on the Cape. And I wanted them to have a big influence on my children's life. I didn't have any kids, but I was thinking about that at the time. And I was also sick of doing the commute back to Boston on Sunday nights or Monday mornings for any of you that knows what that feels like after spending a weekend on the Cape. So I left the job at Kronos, and the way I got a job on the Cape is there was a thing called the Tech Council website, that had emails and phone numbers of all the senior leaders at organizations on the Cape, and I just started emailing and calling them, saying, "Hey, I'm coming to the Cape, and I think I could add value to your company. Would you like to entertain hiring me?" And I got a job that way, which was crazy, nice. But I got a job at Infinium Software, which is a $70 million financial software company leading marketing. That company was purchased by SSA Global, SSA by Infor. All of a sudden, it's $1 billion company, and I'm working from everywhere. Right. And then because it transitioned from being a corporate centric Cape company to a global organization. And at that point, I was working out of my home office and traveling where I needed to travel. And all my teams from that point on were remote based, everywhere work kind of teams.
You didn't get any pushback as you went up the ladder, and particularly with all these mergers and acquisitions? Yeah. There wasn't, well, at this point, Melissa, that's all been nice. And now?
It's time to make a move to a location.
Exactly, to a more
Yeah.
central location because you're going up the ladder and therefore we want to see you more.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that is I think it's about boundaries. You certainly
Mm.
can't put you have to earn the right by showcasing you could do the job in that way,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
but I also had the mindset that I had a boundary to say, this is what I'm going to do. I am
Mhm.
going to work here and live here, and you can
Yeah.
kind of take it or leave it, right? And now you have to earn, again, you have to earn the right. I'm not
Yep.
suggesting everyone walks into, the CEO's office and say, take it or leave it. But
Yep.
I had to kind of
You had already
prove
shown. Yeah.
that I could operate in that way, and that there was low risk for them in and respecting what a boundary that was important to me.
Sure.
So we would talk through it, and there'd be different situations throughout my career where they would want to see a presence in a corporate headquarters more often, and I would come on a Monday and leave on a Wednesday, kind of thing. So
Right. Yep.
I would stay there and be a part of it that way. So it's not to say it wasn't a difficult thing, but I was steadfast to my boundary and what was going to make myself and my family happy first, and then made the work kind of happen around it. And I really believe that you can hire people that, hire the best people for the best job. It doesn't really matter where they're located.
So you were at Infor between 1999 and 2011. During that time, you are working remotely from all your team members, and I would imagine a number of teams below you. What are the things that you were doing then? What were the things that you were finding out, learning, augmenting, tweaking, optimizing to be able to manage and oversee and inspire and motivate bigger and bigger teams and have that important trickle down effects? It's not just your team. You have to be able to be effective in influencing the managers below you and them with their teams.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of learnings and a lot of missteps, right? Where I didn't do it so well. So I don't want to portray that it was always perfect, because it wasn't. And I had a lot of bosses through the years that didn't always appreciate my mindset on this. And that was probably one of the most difficult things, because the first thing that I think is most important is that to give people the benefit of the doubt that they're going to do the right thing. That if you put people in an environment where they can do their best work, and that's different for everybody. For me, I set the boundary, right? I wanted the flexibility. I wanted to be able to be at my kids' things when I needed to be, or whatever is important to you. And I didn't necessarily want to go into the office every day. There are other people that want to. That actually getting up and doing the commute and getting there and commuting home to decompress that's their thing, and that's important to them. So I think it's for this point, it's the benefit of the doubt that people that you bring into your organization are ultimately going to do the right thing. So that's a mindset. If you put them in the environment where they can do the best work and respect their boundaries and what's important to them. So that was really the most important thing. And I did have a lot of people and bosses and various things I worked that didn't believe that principle, right? They felt like and we still run into it. That's not an obsolete concept. I got pushback on that, right? Like, how do you know they're not just taking a vacation day when they say they're working?
And it's a trust thing.
It is a trust thing.
And there are lots of managers and executives who don't trust. And obviously you have strong trust with your team and build that trust with your team. If people don't, which we see a lot of right now.
It's a two-way street, right? Yeah. You have to really assume in your core. And now there are exceptions. You assume that they're going to do the right thing because you've given them what they want, which is flexibility, right? To work in an environment that's best for them. There are people that take advantage of that. And I've run through that with my career. So how do you identify that, right? And I think it's really about, how do you identify that? How do you know when someone, and sometimes it takes longer than you'd like to admit, right? Because you're continuing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But this is where I think is the important piece of all of this, is that every single person in your organization needs to understand what their purpose is and how that relates to the bigger picture vision and mission of the company and what they can do to contribute to that. And then they have clear metrics, goals, expectations against what they're doing to help achieve that. And making that connection for everybody on your team takes the company purpose and translate that into their purpose. And then they want to give more most of the time, right? So the question I said is, how do you identify if they're not? One is if you see that they're not really, after conversations of talking about what their role is and what they're expected to do and their purpose, if they're not really grabbing hold and connecting the dots with that, they're probably not fully in it. And if they're not, so that's the first thing, right? Like, what is the language they're speaking? Do they understand what they're doing and their part in the bigger purpose? And then by having metrics and goals, you're not managing or when it happens, micromanaging the various tactics that they're doing. You're managing, is their purpose, is it aligned to a set of goals, and are they achieving those goals over time, right? Through what it is that they're doing. And that's why if you don't have that goals and measurement set up for that individual person, you don't really have a good way to know if they're embracing the purpose, they know what we're trying to do and their part in it, and that you're measuring the outcomes that individual does. But if you do that in that way with that mindset, you can usually flush those folks out fairly quickly. But it's a very small percentage of the folks in my teams. Most of the time, if you build a team with that mentality, people want to step up and they want to do the best they can do in the environment that they're in.
Exactly. And in my experience, those folks, it's about the job not being the right job for them. And they will feel that whether they're in the office or not, trying to work out what it is that's going to help them connect. And there are a few people who really don't want to work, but generally people are interested to connect with something. We just have to find out what that something is.
Yeah. And I think the four walls of an office don't define that, like to your point, whether you're in the office or you're working from home, you're going to find a way, if you're not into it, to do the minimum. Right. And that's okay too. That was another thing my dad said to me, which I really respect. He said, a lot of people will do the least they can do in their job to get by. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the boundary that they've set for themselves, they're in, but if you always do more than what's expected of you because you want to contribute to the we, which is the company, right? We're all part of the company, then you'll always be successful. And I found that to ring true as well.
Absolutely. So you stay at Info for quite a long time. What was the catalyst for moving on to a couple of different companies before you then later ended up at Ivanti?
Yeah, well, I was at, so I went from Infor to Iron Mountain. Infor, great company, grew through acquisitions, learned a lot, got to work with some amazing people and learned so many things along the way. And in fact, the CEO at Infor became, and one of the VPs I worked for at Infor worked for Ivanti. And several years later, I came back to work with them after doing a lot of other things. So another thing, never burn any bridges, always, do the right thing, because this is a small community we work in. So I left Infor to go to Iron Mountain because I had done a lot of different things at Infor, but I hadn't necessarily done it all together under one umbrella of a team. And Iron Mountain's about a $3 billion organization. And I led really what was growth marketing there, which is all field marketing, demand creation, webs. I basically led everything except for really the corporate kind of side of marketing, which is PR and AR, and had a great teammate there that led that piece of the business. So it allowed me to kind of take all the experiences I had at Infor and take that and run it as a complete team at Iron Mountain. And another great company. And Iron Mountain at that time, it's an older company, been around a long time. And they were highly corporate centric. Like everybody worked from the office.
Apart from you.
Apart from me. And that did change, by the way. This is a bit of a change management story here, which is kind of interesting but again, I set that boundary.
So what happened? You're told to come into the office?
No, I wouldn't have taken the job if I was going to be told to come into the office. What I said was, here's my boundary. I live on the Cape. I'm not moving to Boston. On a good day, it's an hour commute. On a bad day, it's a 3-hour commute. And I'm just not going to do that day in and day out. So again, a little bit of the take it or leave it. But I felt like I had earned the right to say that because of the experiences I had and what I thought I could bring to the company. So I did agree, though, that I would come in on a Monday and leave on a Wednesday. I had mentioned that earlier. or be there at least, 2 nights a week. And I went and I would stay there at the office. But over time, the Iron Mountain team, they wanted to move offices and shrink their square footage. So they offered up a program, which I was like raising the flag and saying this could work, of a flexible work. But you couldn't have your cake and eat it too. You had to say, if I'm going to have my own office space, I need to come in every day. If I don't want my own office space, I can have flexibility, but they're shared spaces that people could use. And at that time, there were a lot of people that opted out for the come in every day and go to the flexible. And Iron Mountain was able to build and move into a beautiful new office space. And they really paved the way for this kind of transition where, big chunk of the team started doing the flexible work at that time.
Okay, so just to put this in context for listeners, this is between 2011 and 2014. So way before the pandemic.
Way before the pandemic, yep.
What I am finding now, leaping ahead for a second, is that there doesn't seem to be as much corporate understanding as I would expect about how different how we're working now is. And it's not to do with just location by any means. It's mostly driven by technology, the future of work. The fact that everything has been accelerating and technology being integrated over the last 30 plus years. So by 2011, that's already there, learning new ways of working. So there hasn't been as much understanding of the need for change management, the need to transform how we're working, which includes flexible working. So I'm very interested, obviously having great experience and understanding about how this worked, how you then helped them understand how to do this effectively, and how much that was really about understanding, clarifying, and designing how people were going to be working from then on.
Sometimes it's the motivation of the company at the time. Mm-hmm. So Iron Mountain in its core was reducing square footage in order to save money and not waste space. Okay. Yep. So they realized after looking at their own financial analysis that ultimately was the motivation at that time. It was not necessarily motivated by, in full transparency, the things that I was just talking about earlier, which is put people in the environment they want to do their best work. And that's no knock at Iron Mountain. I mean, they really went all in to create an amazing space for people that were coming in and allowing for that flexibility.
Which is very cool. Yeah.
Which is very, very cool. But the motivation was not necessarily at that time the things that I sort of stood behind. But that was okay because it gave the platform by which to make that change happen, which is amazing.
And they're saving a huge amount of money. I mean, if you're driven by that, then you say, well, we need to make this change because just as many other corporations right now are finding out, yes, we can actually save a huge amount of money. And therefore, what are we going to do to make this all work? So there is a commitment to make it work because they see the benefit of the savings. With that commitment, with your learnings, what happened?
Well, I think it was about 30% of the people that were in the office, I don't know the exact amount, but it was somewhere around that, did opt for the flexible work environment. They let go of their own space in the office. So they said, I'll have shared space. And people just kind of started coming and going as they pleased. And they made the environment so great to come in the office that people still felt good about coming in when they wanted to come in, but they weren't forced to. And that gave a real sense of flexibility. And if anything, their engagement scores went up from the organization. People were more productive. They were able to contribute more as an organization. There was no downside in any of that, only upside. Upside for the company financially, they were in a better spot, less space, more flexible. And the people that opted for that were in an environment where they felt like they could do great work. So it ended up being, and it still is to this day, I think a very good win-win. And I was very proud to be participating in that change.
You mentioned change management as part of this. Change management is really important as we're moving now into steady state, flexible hybrid working, sometimes fixed hybrid, but these are very different ways that we're working. How did they help support the change and the change management? Because people going in the office, staying there 5 days a week and then commuting home again, and then having very flexible ways of working. it is a major change. And
Mm-hmm.
some people, however well they worked before, need to work out their preferences, work out how they work best, form those boundaries that you have been so clear about in the past. How did they support that with your inputs, I'm sure?
Yeah, I think so. My input was the things I had talked about before is create purpose for your teams, which Iron Mountain was already pretty darn good at that, right? Iron Mountain is a strong culture of the majority of the people or the teams within that organization knowing what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that they built upon that as a way to continue to connect folks with clear goals and objectives, a real understanding of how to manage performance, having principles and protocols around performance management. And they applied those things to folks that could work from wherever they wanted to work. And some of the leaders were resistant. In fact, one woman I remember came up to me, one of my mentors when I was at Iron Mountain, and she was pregnant and having a baby. And she said, look, I'm going to leave Iron Mountain. And this was after they deployed this program of flexibility. Okay. She still felt like her leader didn't really embrace it at the time. So there's always pockets of that, right? Like the company is saying this, but there's this vibe of like, wait, why is it that this team, everyone's still, 30% of the people of this team didn't opt into this, right? So there was a vibe of this change isn't happening. So you have your early adopters, your team like me, myself, and other folks leaders within the organization that pushed it really hard. And then, and all the things that we talked about, and other groups that were like signaling, that's for them, not for us, right? So this woman, she came into my office and she's like, I'd love your support, and I'm going to get some references and things like that. And I said, why are you leaving? Well, even though we said this is the rule, I don't feel like my manager is supporting it. And I said, okay, are you good at your job? Yes, I'm excellent at my job. Are you valued? Yes, I'm very valued. I said, then walk into that office and say, this is what it's going to take for me to be happy here. I'm having a child. I'm going on a leave. I want to come back. But in order to make this work, going back to boundaries, in order to make this work, I need to do it in this structure. And if not, I'm going to have to make a change. And I don't want to make a change. And then the other question I asked her, do you like it here? So are you good at your job? Are you valued? Do you give it everything you can do? And do you like it here? Are you enjoying it? All those things were yes. If she was like, maybe she wouldn't answer to me that she's not good at her job, but she would look in the mirror at herself and say, listen, I'm valued on this team. So if you've earned it, you walk in and say, this is what my request is. And if they can't meet you where you want to be, then, but don't assume. Don't just assume. Go in there and have that conversation. And she did. And they absolutely will give you that. If I left you in the impression that wasn't going to be okay, my apologies. Great. It was like a complete, and this is someone who would have just maybe walked out the door, who was a huge asset to the company. So, sometimes when you get the vibe that the changes, different stages of change are happening, and you have a group of people that aren't quite in there, check it out, right? Check out, lean in, make sure you have the tough conversation, set your boundary, earn the right, and then go after it and make it happen.
Okay, so fast forward to where we are now. There are a number of companies who are really leaning into flexible working, flexible hybrid, sometimes fully remote, whatever that might be. And then there are other companies that are still trying to make the very traditional ways of working effective. Everybody else is in the middle, and that's by far the majority of companies.
Yep.
But there are lots of ways that they are not set up for success, and it's going to be challenging, I see, for several years. There's some very interesting data that's come out of Ivanti, where you are now, showing some of the different strains and tensions, as well as hugely positive benefits that are coming out of where we have evolved to, accelerated by the pandemic, because Infor, Iron Mountain, and obviously the other companies you've worked at as well must have allowed you to be working flexibly. We're at a place where a lot of things need to be learned, need to be understood, and there are some key aspects of the way forward that have not been embraced and understood, and some not so productive behaviors, let's say monitoring keystrokes, things like that, that we're seeing that are really not helping progress towards effective work. What are the
Mhm.
key things that you saw from the report that just came out that stood out to you as positive beacons, but also alarm bells that we need to be
Mm.
thinking about?
It's a great question. And I will say that Ivanti is really paving the way for flexible work, everywhere work approach, not only
Hmm.
culturally in how we build and run and manage our business internally at the highest and the executive level of the organization and pushed on down across the business, but also what we deliver to our customers to make everywhere work and flexible
Hmm.
work a safe environment for people to do their best work. So it's, I'm definitely proud of being a part of a company that's spearheading that. And we do a regular annual thought leadership or research report to gather
Hmm.
some data on
Right.
what we're seeing out there, right? And what the
Hmm.
realities of what's happening. And there's some really interesting perspective that's come out of the research we've done, and it's been validated by internally and customers. And I think that one of the first things is that 85% of the business leaders that we surveyed, and this is done as a third-party research paper, so it's
Yep.
completely unbiased, but
Right.
85% of business leaders we surveyed support flexible work environments, which is great. And only 15% of them believe employees should be in the office full time. So that's good, right? That's a
Yep.
good thing. They're saying, yep, we got it, we address it,
Right.
and flexible work is really important. But on the flip side, there's real concern with the employees that IT professionals within an organization and security professionals
Yeah.
are working together in
Mm.
unison to give a wonderful experience for their employees and make sure that it's super, super safe.
Because, of course, they now have a very different remit because they have to be taking care of many more different scenarios with people distributed everywhere. So their job has changed significantly.
Right, right, and almost in conflict in some ways. At least that's what
Mm.
our research has showed, that the IT professionals and the security professionals. One thing that we know for sure, in both sides of that fence, really are the hero in this story of everywhere
Mm.
work, and that the IT professionals are saying we want to give our employees the best environment. We want to make it easy.
Right.
We want to have them, have a wonderful experience with us. And I think IT professionals genuinely feel that way. And
Right.
HR is part of that scenario, right? Working with with
Absolutely.
IT. But
Yep.
and security professionals are saying that's awesome and we want that too, but we're at risk here. If we don't keep
Mm.
our employees safe with managing the devices and making sure we protect from threat actors who are getting more and more sophisticated, then we are putting our employees at risk by doing things that maybe are to the advantage of a better experience.
And the business at risk, right?
And the business at risk, exactly, the individuals
Yeah.
and the business at risk. So they're at odds with each other. And I'm not not
Mm.
suggesting there's infighting kind of odds. I'm just
No,
saying
no.
their core reality of what they're looking to do is at odds. And our survey results at 84% say that silos of between security and IT is having a
Ah,
negative impact on
sure.
their business, and 82% say that those silos are driving down their productivity. Putting security and IT as the heroes in this story, which I truly believe they are,
Right.
and that's having them come together. And Ivanti is in a position where we can provide a platform that allows them to work together. So they're getting
Right.
accomplishing the
Yeah.
same things. Where
Yep.
they, a CIO is saying experience, 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 and a CISO is saying, yeah, keep them safe, but they need the data, the information, the
Right.
insights, the experience to be unified
Yep.
in a way that they can make decisions that are fully aligned. And I think that's the big challenge that our industry is facing today. And there's more work to do there for sure.
There are a number of different things that I saw in the data related to how people are working the days that they're not in the office,
Mm,
assuming that most people are not working fully remotely. That one of the biggest challenges they had, there were a lot of people who had no change in how well they felt they could collaborate with their teammates, which I thought was great. And the majority felt there was no change or little change. There were some people who thought they still didn't have the tools. But one of the biggest challenges was how to get the attention of my manager. I think it was 40% find it harder to connect with their manager when they're working remotely, which goes to the how, that they're not set up for success. The IT things were low on the charts in terms of how easy it was to get an IT person to help them out and connect them or seamlessly get access to a tool or something. But their manager, not so much. So it is that connection between HR, IT, and security, as well as FM, I believe, as well. When you're connecting with some of your clients, this challenge between where the flexibility is, who's making the decisions, is it at the team level, is it from the top down? How are you seeing that affect how effective a company is because of your deep experience in this and what works and what doesn't work? Because obviously Ivanti is there as the operating fabric of companies as they're deploying these new working models. How are they actually leveraging them successfully in thinking in a different way?
Yeah, I think the answer really lies fundamentally in frontline managers. So making sure that, because, if you have, like in our case, where we have a leadership team who is very, very bought in to this approach, which trickles down to our senior leadership team and everyone's engaged. But the frontline managers, the ones that are managing individual contributors who are accountable and responsible for getting outcomes for the company and the how they do the work, right? And when they do the work and that they get to those goals and objectives that the company is looking to achieve, the frontline managers really have to be fully bought in. And that doesn't mean that we're, it's a top-down edict, right? That says, okay, frontline managers, you will do this, because then the translation comes to them. They're like translating it through, like, I've been told that this is the way we're going to operate, right? And instead of really understanding the value of this type of approach, that this is the flexibility is what the workers want, and that they have a certain responsibility in their day and day as frontline managers to manage their teams differently than they would if they were just sitting right over, watching them and looking at them physically doing the work, right? So I think, and that takes time and effort and energy and focus for an organization to bring along the frontline managers to the same thing I was talking about before, that the frontline managers understand the purpose of what they're doing. And part of that is making sure that they deploy those principles of flexible work and the holding them accountable for the outcomes and respecting and giving them independence and respecting the work that they do. In our research, it's said, 40, I think it was like almost 50% of workers would quit a job to get the flexibility if they felt like their managers weren't supporting them. And that's a very strong statement, right? Yeah. Especially in this environment where it's getting, it's not the day where it was everyone was quitting their jobs and jumping from place to place. That is changed, right? It's harder. It's harder to get jobs out there, but they'll start working quickly to look for one if you don't give them an environment where they can do their best work, and that the frontline managers aren't supporting that effort. And listen, every company is different, and I fully respect every industry is different, right? Every job is different. There are some jobs that require, in order to do the best work, that they are in an environment where there's sometimes less flexibility. And we get that too. And that has to be addressed in a way where they understand the why behind the what of that role and what's expected of them. So, we can't just wash it all with the same brush, right? We understand flexibility is about not only what the company needs, but also what the individual needs.
Yes, and I am a huge advocate for ensuring that there are equitable, flexible options for fixed on-site workers, as I term them, which often is to do with hours and schedules. Is there any other data that really jumps out from this report? There were so many different elements. I was very interested to see that 81% said where I do my work should not matter as long as it gets done well. That was high. I was really delighted to see that. And also that 79% said letting people work anywhere is the future of professional employment. I had a little hallelujah for that one.
Yeah, just under 50% said when my employer is inflexible about my schedule, it's a sign of disrespect.
Yes. That really stood out to me as well.
Yeah, it really comes down to the principles that I talked about at the beginning, which is giving people the benefit of the doubt, trusting in your employees that they're going to do the right thing. And that because of that, if you put people in an environment where they can do their best work, they'll give back to you. And the data is very much pointing to that. Now, that's not to say that people don't take advantage, which they will. And that's why companies have to be very, very committed to understanding that they need to be clear on purpose, roles, responsibilities, outcomes, deliverables, which should have always been the case. And that's why Iron Mountain was able to make that transition fairly quickly because they had those principles instilled. If you don't have that, that's when things start to fall apart. That's when teams start to fall apart. Because you don't have a way to really hold people accountable in a way that's respecting the flexible work principles. And I think as I've said a couple times on this call, I think that the IT professionals and the security professionals ultimately have the opportunity and are the hero in this story when and if they use technology to their best advantage to close some of these gaps. We talked about culture and the importance of all those things, but it's also having an alignment between IT and security where they have real insights into how the business is operating so they can provide the right tools and to really maximize the flexible work that's so important to our employees today.
Thank you. Melissa, I always ask, what can a company do? And you just said it. Right there, you said exactly what they can do, focusing and getting those tools out there. So, Melissa, it's been an absolute joy to hear your journey and all of the things that you have been doing as a trailblazer in this space and what you're doing now through Ivanti, also enabling that for other companies through the platform that they provide. So really, really appreciate everything that you shared today.
Thank you so much. It's been a total blast. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much. Thanks again so much to Melissa Puls, Chief Marketing Officer and SVP of Customer Success at Ivanti. You can follow Melissa on LinkedIn and on X at PulsMelissa, PulsMelissa. If you want to find out more about Ivanti, please go to Ivanti's website at Ivanti.com, on LinkedIn and X at GoIvanti, GoIvanti. Ivanti's 2024 Everywhere Work report referred to can be found on their website. Immediate action tip. Put people in an environment where they can do their best work, being clear about purpose, roles, responsibilities, outcomes, and deliverables. And ensure there is alignment between IT and security teams so they can provide and support the right tools for flexible work. Then trust that employees will do the right thing. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You could also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, commentary, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.